Are you doomed to be poor if your parents are poor? If your parents were poor, were you doomed to be poor? That's what we're talking about today. So I was born into a one-income household. My dad was the only working parent, but my mom was a bookkeeper before meeting and marrying my dad. She stopped working when they got married and they started having kids. And my parents did one thing that changed the trajectory of my life. And I want to talk about that. But first, are you doomed to be poor if your parents are poor? Statistically speaking, there is a correlation between your family's wealth or lack of and your future outcome as an adult. The American dream, that's really what it's about. Intergenerational mobility, your ability to move up the economic ladder compared to your parents, does exist. But it varies by country, by region, and by the environment you grow up in. And so, what does the data say? According to Harvard's data, if you were born in the bottom 1/5 of household incomes, you had about a 7 to 10% chance of moving to the top quintile. They found what was called a stickiness of wealth. If you were born in the top, you had a 5 times chance of remaining in the top. Now, what are these quintiles? What do they look like? Household income of $29,000 or less would put you in the bottom 1/5. Quintile number 2 is $29,000 to $57,000. Quintile number 3 is $57,000 to $94,000. Quintile 4 is $94,000 to $165,000. And the top quintile of household incomes is $165,300 or more, according to 2023's data. Now, Harvard wasn't alone in this research. The Brookings Institute also found that there's this, it's hard to break your class. If you were born poor, you're more likely to stay poor. And if you were born wealthy, you're far likelier to stay wealthier. The numbers show that you have a 43% chance of staying poor if you were born in the bottom and a 39% chance of staying at the top. And when you move from the top, maybe you move a quintile down, you don't necessarily move all the way to the bottom. Very few do. Now, what did my parents do? Raj Chetty's research over at Harvard also found that while where you start matters, where you live and the zip code can dramatically change your outcome. Now, it isn't a causation, but there's a correlation to the fact of where you live. And they produced what was called the land of opportunity. So in my family's case, my dad was working on the roads and the highways, and they made the decision to buy a home out of Long Island as far as the highway would go. And at the time, in the mid-60s, it went halfway into the island, and they happened to pick a zip code that is on the high end of the Opportunity Atlas. And the Opportunity Atlas looks at data from census data from the 1980s onward, children born in the 1980s, and then they map how they would do in comparison to their parents 30 years later. So you look at a child 30 years. So at 2010, how was that 1980, 1981, 1982? So 30 years later, where was their level of income in comparison to their parents? They're starting to plot the research to go backwards, but they find that these lands of opportunities, sometimes they don't change that much. And sometimes it has nothing to do with what you might think. It's not just because there are jobs in the area, because a lot of times people are being brought in. So they found that in Charlotte, for instance, Charlotte, North Carolina, that although there's a lot of jobs, it's not really helping the poverty level. It's not helping the quintile that is living on poverty. Sometimes what happened, there's gentrification, that people moved out of the neighborhoods because more people move in. But in my family's case, moving into a opportunity neighborhood or a zip code that extremely was helpful in changing the course of my life was not something that I think that they thought that they were doing. They just wanted more land, and the idea of living in low-income housing probably just was not appealing for my dad. Imagine, he wanted so many kids. He was looking to bring life to his home. So, what does zip code matter so much? Well, they say that it's about the quality of schools, the quality of the streets, so there's less crime, social networks that you have around you, what are the neighborhoods like, the support systems that you have around you, and the life skills that kids are going to learn. There should be low segregation, racial and economic. So more income equality in the neighborhood. So you could move someone with low income into a higher income neighborhood, and they should do very well. Now, a lot of people have a problem with this, right? In theory, they want to give people a chance to improve their lives. They want to help people who are poverty stricken to improve. But they don't want them moving into their neighborhoods. And so I am an example of someone who got out of poverty. And poverty for me would have been because of the number of mouths to feed. It wasn't necessarily because of my parents' income. The Brookings Institute put out a study, and they found that if you do these 6 things in sequence, you have more likelihood of success of reaching the American dream in your life. And they called it the success sequence. But if you do just 3 in sequential order, your chance of moving out of poverty jumps to 97%. Now, what are those 3 things? Finishing high school, working full-time, and delay having children until you're in a marriage partnership and over the age of 21. Just those 3 things alone increased your odds to 75% chance of moving into the middle class. And they describe the middle class as 3 times the level of poverty. So 300% greater than poverty. So if poverty in 2025 for a household of 4 is 32,000, then it would be in the 90-something thousand range that you would be moving up into. That's pretty dramatic, just doing those 3 things in sequential order. But there are 6. If you do all 6, then your odds move up to 81%. And the additional 3 are continuing education. It could be vocational, it could be higher education as far as going to college. In fact, they say that college breaks the stickiness. Now, I don't know how this will change in the future, and I imagine it may, but college itself stops the stickiness of poverty by removing it from 47% just down to 10. But it's also vocational studies that you do. And I have siblings in my life who went on to do vocational studies and didn't graduate college. And they are just as successful as every one of my family members who did graduate from college. Now this coincides with Harvard study on zip codes, because opportunity neighborhoods have higher rates of high school graduations, they have lower rates of teenage pregnancies, and less incarcerations, more going on in continuing education, and of course people are working full time. So the success sequence order is graduating high school, working full time, delay having kids. Number 4 would be vocational or continuing education as far as college is concerned. Number 5 would be work continuously and stability with your job. So these would be things like improving your income over time. And the number 6 thing would be family stability and financial stability. So all those 6 things that you do in sequential order increase your odds of achieving the American dream. Now let's talk about the American dream. The American dream, where you look at kids and are they doing better than their parents before them? When you look at them based on the age of 30 and 40, how are kids doing? Now, if we will look at data from the 1940s, we can't specifically align kids to their parents. You couldn't look at kids themselves to their parents, but you could look at the data from how kids did overall 30 years later. So kids born in the 1940s, how are they doing in the 1970s? And what economics have found is that 92% of them were beating all the parents in income. They surpassed parents on income by a lot. Now that could be because of the fact that we had the Great Depression coming out of that. So some of that is attributed to that. A lot of it is also contributed to the US economy was growing. So the GDP was growing, right? But even when they looked at the children who were coming from poverty, they still outperformed by pretty much majority of the highest income of the highest income from the parents. So it was pretty remarkable that the American dream was alive and well in the 1940s going into 1970s. In fact, they said that incomes, household incomes, or your paycheck would rise 3% each year at an inflationary rate. And income equality existed back then. There was not the same difference in income. So you have the top 1% maybe representing a little less than 10% of the overall household income back in that range. So when you looked at how much ahead are the top 1% doing, they controlled about 10% of the overall household income. Fast forward to 1980 data leading into today, children that were born in the 1980s, and I was born, I was raised in the 70s, so this is not my data, this is 10 years later. If you looked at the children from the 1980s, income has been rising 1.5% per year. So income at a 3% rate, that would mean every 24 years, you would be making double the salary that you were, based on the rule of 72. You take the 3% divided into 72, every 24 years, you'd be making double what you were making before. And this kept in pace with inflation back then. Now they're finding it's 1.5%. So it is not even keeping up with inflation. And of course, we all know this. The price of goods have gone up dramatically. But what they're also finding is the top 1% of income inequality has grown dramatically. So the top has been growing by an inflationary rate of 6% a year, or the top 0.1%. So they've been compounding on compounding. You take that 6 into 72, the rule of 72, every 12 years, their incomes are being doubled. And that makes sense because CEOs and the like and C-suite executives are making hundreds of times more than the ordinary income worker. So income inequality has been grown. So the American dream has been disappearing to the point where a young man today, when compared to the income of his father, has a 35% chance of making more. 92, 35. They say it's a coin flip now, whether or not a child will earn more than their parents. If you're in the top quintile, the odds are even lower because it's very hard for a child today to outpace their parents as far as growth rate. So we're going to start to see that the top quintile, the top 1/5 of household incomes are not going to be able to substantiate or stay in that stickiness of wealth. They will drop quintiles. The American dream has to be slipping away. It is slipping away. But in other countries, it isn't as much. So here in the United States, 2/3 of it can be attributed to income equality. 1/3 of it can be attributed to the fact that there's just lower levels of economic growth going on. Companies may be doing better, but overall, there's lower growth of household incomes of the overall wealth. So what can we do about this? Are you doomed to be poor if your parents are poor? Not necessarily, you're not. But it's definitely going to be a bit harder for you to achieve the American dream. And so this Opportunity Atlas opens the door in the fact that if you are in a low income household, even just moving a neighborhood, even just moving potentially 1.9 miles away, look at that Opportunity Atlas. Some of these land of opportunities that you could move to do not mean that they could require more wealth. They have better schools, safer neighborhoods, and more opportunity to have kids dream and aspire to do more things. So these social networks that they have, there's lower rates of segregation going on. So people are surrounded by everyone. The melting pot of America of what it should be. And income equality is more stable in higher opportunity neighborhoods. So if you are poor, it is said that you need to be moving your children before the age of 13 because one of the studies show that it isn't just quantitative skills, it isn't just the cognitive skills that children are learning. And they find that children who do really, really well in math by the 3rd grade level, they're the ones who are the inventors. But the inventing is not happening at the poverty level. It is only happening in the top quintile. So the people who come up with patents that actually go on to improve something or come up with something, they're coming from the wealthy. They're not coming from poverty. But changing the environment where your kids grow up, you're giving them the opportunity for more. I was around a family that built such great financial habits. We may have not had a lot, but my mom taught us a lot about financial lessons. My dad was really good with money as well. And while school may have been a bit tough for me because kids can be cruel when you don't look like that you fit in, and we didn't fit in. We were an Italian-speaking household. As a matter of fact, many of my siblings before me got left back into kindergarten because they could not speak the language. By the time I went to school, I could speak English. So I learned from my siblings ahead of me. I learned the softer skills as well, and this is what sociologists are saying are extremely important to help children achieve the American dream. Some of those skills include conscientiousness, being very organized and responsible, hardworking, and goal setting. The neighborhoods that we grew up in really improved our chances. But the family dynamics we were brought into, the dual parent household, that was prevalent in our neighborhood. And so I grew up with mentorship and guidance around me in the schools and role models that I could look up at to my siblings. There was never a thought in my mind of not finishing school. So Brookings Institute of the Success Sequence was on my radar. So when I marched into the principal's office, by all means, graduate and go on to college. So are you doomed to be broke? You may have not necessarily learned financial habits, and you may have not had good mindsets going on when you're growing up, but that doesn't mean that you can't change them. What you do next matters. Be aware of what you were taught and learn the lessons that maybe your parents didn't. I wasn't doomed to be broke because my parents changed our environment, and I was around really good role models, teachers and programs. The social networks were really strong. I had soft skills and cognitive skills that I was learning as I was going along. So perseverance and working hard, those went a long way. And then of course, I learned financial lessons as well. When I was a kid, I was a little entrepreneur in school. I learned this from my siblings. We did fundraisers and raised money for the school and for charities. I've done so many walkathons, runathons. Those were awesome. But we turned around and did that, and I did it as a little business out of my backpack when I was a child. And so I was able to afford the things that my parents could not buy for me. And eventually, as I graduated and I moved into the 6th grade, I didn't want to be doing those things, and I waited until I turned 15 to get a job. But those lessons that I learned early, you can learn them too. Have agency over yourself. You are responsible for your life and your choices. And the soft skills you learn, as well as the cognitive ones, go a long way in life. Put action into play. Agency without action is meaningless. You have to take responsibility for what you're doing and put steps into place. And that could be just as simply following the success sequence. Ensure that your kids graduate from high school and try to teach them as much as you can about personal finances. The statistics are really grim when it comes to that. Only 31% of parents teach their kids about personal finances, and the odds of being taught decrease dramatically when it comes to low-income households. Be the change that makes the difference. And then last but not least is to make adjustments. Not only is awareness important and agency over your life and actions that you put into place, but adjustments are needed as well. And so for me as a young adult going into life and taking on debt upon debt, I ended up having to make adjustments to my spending, to my finances, to improve my life. These are the things that mattered. And if one thing that I can say from this is no, you're not doomed to be poor because your parents are poor. The changes and the choices you make matter. The Opportunity Atlas is available online. You can go to opportunityatlas.org and actually put in a zip code and see if moving will make a difference. Move your child before they're the age of 13 because that will make a bigger difference in life. Early adolescence is really when they learn the soft skills. That is what's moving the needle for most people now, because cognitive skills eventually with AI potentially may not matter as much. Anyway, this is Regina from Simply Fundamental. Thank you for tuning in. Hit like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.